Hello and welcome to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show. Cannot stick to sports, Brendan. Thank you for joining me once again. It is Wednesday, November 12th. We're coming to you live an hour early, 1 p.m. Eastern time to talk about all things sports media. We're going to kick it off with Pat McAfee's Donald Trump interview and then get to the Disney-YouTube TV dispute later in the episode. Make sure to subscribe, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Brendan, we about an hour ago got Pat McAfee's instant reaction to the criticism of his Donald Trump interview on Veterans Day. I think the headline there was that he told people that criticized his interview that they did not care about the troops. Brendan, do you agree with
hate
McAfee's? Sorry?
We hate him. I think you said we hate the troops if we didn't like the interview. Not we. I mean, I don't hate the interview. I think that this is typical McAfee. Pretty much everything about this whole situation, and we can talk about the contents of the conversation that they held yesterday while McAfee's show was live from Parris Island, South Carolina, which is a big base and training facility for the Marine Corps. A cool show. The intro to it with the, band and the statement and introduction from the, I think it was, some high-ranking official, all the pageantry of that and the honoring that he did. I have no problem with any of that, right? And I don't really care personally about Pat McAfee doing this, but I think that it illustrates a problem that ESPN viewers, other sports media people have continually run into when it comes to McAfee, which is, a constant, I think, chip on your shoulder mentality, right? So he has Donald Trump on for about 20, 25 minutes on Tuesday. And, anyone in their right mind would have been able to say that no matter what happened in that interview, it was going to be fairly controversial, right? I think that's obvious, as we talked about on Monday with the interview that Trump did on the Fox broadcast of the Commanders-Lions game. This is not a typical president. This is not a typical moment in America. If you're choosing to do this, what comes with it. And yet for Pat McAfee, it seems to be that he wants to constantly make it about something else, in my personal opinion. And there's a dancing, a sidestepping away from the facts and the realities of the situation. Like you mentioned, his main line was if you're against what happened yesterday, I would like to say you hate the troops, and you should go ahead and swallow that, and you can take that to where you want to go. Later on, he talked about people saying mean stuff, which is tongue-in-cheek. He's obviously using kiddish language on purpose, but he says it every time. So at a certain point, it actually is what bothers him, and we should take him at his word that he can't handle the blowback of a situation like this. Otherwise, he would not keep responding this way, right? And he says, got a lot of people that don't know what a football looks like telling me they're never watching my show again, and I would like to let you know, good, fuck you, let's move on. Right? And it's what are we supposed to do here? You're making a decision as a host of a very high-profile ESPN show to host a very open-ended, little to no pushback, celebratory, even comical, if you were to watch it, interview where the president does his usual shtick, and then no one's allowed to say anything about it. Okay, so what are we doing here? What was really the purpose of this? What's the end game? What's the long game here? I've talked about this for the extensive when we've been doing this show, Drew. Mostly with Ben, but even a couple times with you, including on Monday, where it's I just want these places that we cover and the people that we cover to own their actions, right? And that's the part that I think is just so frustrating about Pat McAfee, including from his own audience, which we can get to, where it's just this. It's I'm against everybody unless they're for me, but there's exceptions, and sometimes I'll change my mind. It's always me against you, and it just isn't productive.
Here's where I stand on this, Brendan, and let me know if you agree. So I think on the one read of this situation is what you just put out there, is that McAfee is sensitive. He sees the criticism. He can't help himself but respond about it publicly on his show. And it's kind of this doom loop of just like grievance, that he does something that's controversial. He tries to, plead, feign ignorance about why it's controversial and stuff like that. And then he goes on and complains about the coverage of that event. I think the other read of this, and this is probably the camp I fall more into, I think McAfee is a smart guy. I think he understands what he's doing. And I think he understands that by reacting in such a way, it drives the news cycle from places like us and other people that cover the industry and people that just cover, this type of, interview in the media. It makes them cover it in such a way where it's going to drive even more attention to McAfee, make him even a bigger player in media. And it's kind of self-serving in the sense that he's growing his audience and kind of giving red meat to his base by playing up the grievance card here. I don't know if I do think maybe on some level he is actually sensitive to the criticism, but I think he also understands that it's good business for him to complain about this type of stuff because it's what his audience wants.
I guess I just don't know if it's accurate to say that this is what his audience wants, right? Like, I don't know. I a lot of the time, like, the political aspect of it, that's kind of impossible to measure and probably wavers depending on the subject of the conversation or the time that it happens, right? Like, politics are ever changing. People can vote for somebody and then go back on it or feel differently the next time you ask them about it. So I'm not even meaning where does Pat McAfee's audience, especially with how huge it is, sit politically. I wouldn't pretend to know all of that, but the grievance part of it, I think that if you kind of look at, like, for instance, the comment section, the Pat McAfee subreddit, some of these things that are, for all intents and purposes, like the best we can do to try to analyze the overall feelings of something that is hundreds of thousands of people big, I don't think they like it at all. And I would say that a lot of media people who allow themselves to get pushed into this direction, I do think it turns off their audience. Whether you're talking about Joe Rogan or Howard Stern or any other number of people, I think that it's cute at the beginning, right? It is something to galvanize the audience of a show that feels like an underdog as you are supporting it and pouring your time and maybe money into something you like and spend that time with and feel connected to. But once you're like Pat McAfee and you, for instance, are at the mountaintop of mountaintops, like, nobody really is as prominent in sports media right now as Pat McAfee, I think you would say, right? And at that point in time, I think it starts to really rub off on people the wrong way because it's, I don't know, like, this is me psychoanalyzing it a little bit.
It's inauthentic.
Like, yeah, because he's not an underdog. There's nobody against him, really. He has everything he wants. And I also feel like it to me, if I'm one of those audience members, right, and I'm sitting there thinking, damn, when you were just on YouTube or like Barstool Radio 12 years ago, I mean, obviously not like 12, but 10 years ago, and I found you and I loved you because I was a Colts fan or I was whatever. I got you here. Why can't you appreciate that? Why is it always something else? And I think that that's the stage that people hit where the audience does start to get a little bit sick of it. And that's not to mention the ESPN concerns over this, the other ESPN hosts who ventured into territory like this and got blowback or, their job security wavered as a result and all these other kind of tangential things we can hit on. But like, just Pat McAfee and his audience, the people who tuned into this, I don't think it's a no-brainer that this is like a net win. I think this is something Pat McAfee wanted to do, which is why I think Pat McAfee should own that decision rather than jumping immediately into defensiveness. Why don't you tell us why you did want to do this or what you thought of doing the interview or why for instance, your opinion has changed from last year when, because it was campaign time, you said you would never do something like this. And you were asked by both Kamala and Trump to do interviews, and you said no. Why? What has changed now? Like, these are points of view that I would love to hear from Pat McAfee, rather than fuck you, which is literally what he said. Like, it couldn't get more like base and silly than where this conversation has gone.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. And I think you bring up a great point. I kind of had totally forgotten that last year presidential candidates were, vying to get on his show, knowing it's the platform that can reach a lot of young people, sports fans, perhaps low propensity voters, which is a lot of times these days what these elections come down to. And he refused to have both of them on. So yes, what has changed in the last 12 months that would have, made this an okay decision? I think he would go ahead and cite Veterans Day again, because that's what he did originally. That's what he did today, saying this was all about celebrating the veterans. Well, if it's all about celebrating the veterans, why are you letting the interview veer off in every which direction and letting Trump do his whole shtick? I think
that's where I think ESPN has to become part of the conversation, right? Because people like Burke Magnus have insisted, as this experimental pioneering deal where they're licensing this show that is very aggressive about pushing boundaries. They have insisted that there is a line at which they would step in and make editorial decisions about what is allowed to air on Pat McAfee's show, or potentially punishments for what he chooses to air on his show, or whatever. And not only have we seen things like the cursing, which he pretended for about 6 months was going to wind down because of conversations with the ESPN personalities, which I'm not insulted by. I don't care. But, it's an example of this push-pull clearly going in the McAfee direction, and up to much bigger dynamics like this one, or having Dana White on to talk about topics like this, having Aaron Rodgers on to talk about the FEMA response to a hurricane, and now hosting a conversation with the president where he talks about hanky-panky in the 2020 election and things like that, where people are legitimately going to prison and being sued, and very serious topics.
Not only people,
no line from
ESPN. Media companies are paying hundreds of millions of dollars because of lies told about the 2020 election. So it's like, this is a direct thing that ESPN will have to deal with.
And so my point is, clearly there is either no line or a heretofore in the history of media unseen line for Pat McAfee at ESPN. He is allowed to go further than anyone has ever been able to go on this network, or on any network I can really think of, because I guess it's worth it for them financially.
Okay, so I want to take this big picture and kind of look into the future here, Brendan, because you have a really, I think, smart perspective on this, and a really good beat on how these things typically play out in the media, especially digital, like modern day media. Is there going to be a backlash from McAfee's core audience? Is there going to be some sort of pushback? Not necessarily immediately, but if we're looking 3 to 5 years down the line, is the McAfee shtick going to be so tired by then where he kind of falls into this, more right-coded Joe Rogan-esque type of box where, all right, if you're a Pat McAfee fan, like, there's going to be, there's labels that are going to be put on you just by dint of listening to him, and it's not going to be as mass appeal as he was when ESPN brought him on a couple years ago under this licensing agreement.
Well, yeah, let's be clear. Like, I may not know, I may not pretend to know, like, McAfee, the politics of McAfee's audience. I'm just the type of person that doesn't love to put political labels on big groups anyway, in terms of like party affiliation or like candidate voting, right? But like, one thing I will tell you for sure is that culturally, I do think that there is like a counterculture and line towing inherent, vibe that this show has always strived for, and it's no surprise that it came from Barstool, right? Like that it's a child of Barstool more than anything else, and I think it's like important to understand it that way. I just think that people don't like complaining. People just don't like to listen to content that's inherently negative and played up and conflict oriented. And I think that that's really it. And like Rogan is a good example. Like his perch used to be the entirety of Kilimanjaro was between him and the next person. And it's just not that way anymore. And I don't think it's because he voted for Donald Trump. I think it's because he can't shut up about stuff that makes him mad. And people don't like to listen to that. It's not fun when you're a truck driver driving around the Midwest delivering whatever shit's in your car and you turn on Joe Rogan whining for 3 hours. It's not good content. It's not fun. And that's what I think he runs the risk of losing, especially as a show that purports to be celebratory. We love sports. Everybody rallies around sports. Well, not when you put on a show like this. That doesn't last for as long.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like McAfee's show, I think, grew in popularity a lot because it was a great counterbalance to what you're seeing on ESPN with First Take and with the other debate shows on FS1 and, you know, the rest of sports media, which was always negative in tone. And McAfee flipped that on its head, where he was going to interview athletes, long form, positive, celebratory, allow them to the platform to kind of, you know, pump up their sport. And, you know, you're even seeing that today. Like, I think right before we got on, you know, he has a couple NHL players on trying to pump up that league where they're never going to get a segment on First Take or Get Up. Yeah. And I think people like that. Like, people gravitate towards that. There's a reason people are tuning into a sports show in the middle of the day. It's because they're a freaking sports fan, you know? They don't want to hear.
And I think I should say, and I don't know how you feel, but like, I enjoy the show in those moments. Like when I started here was right at the exact, like the week that McAfee premiered on ESPN. And I had never really tuned in before outside of like some Rogers clips because those would just go viral all the time. And I was like, this is actually pretty awesome compared to the same, like you watch that and then you watch First Take. It is different and it does stand out. And when they are being positive, it is refreshing and can be very cool because they focus on different kinds of things and they have a little bit of a different vibe around how they talk about stuff. And I do think that's what people like. And so that's exactly right. Like the contrast is what's going to lose people.
Yeah. It's the same thing going on with NBC's NBA coverage right now and why people are gravitating towards that. All right. You know, personally, I've had enough Trump talk for this week on this podcast. So I'm going to transition into a Disney-YouTube TV dispute that has now gone on for almost 2 weeks. Still the biggest story, I would say, in sports media right now, maybe outside of the Trump shit. But we had a couple updates this week, and I think they're worth noting for our audience. On Monday night, John Oran, Puck's sports correspondent, came out with a report that YouTube TV was demanding rates lower than the other 3 largest pay TV distributors in the country. So we're talking Comcast, DirecTV, Charter. YouTube, per Oran, wanted to receive rates for Disney's content that were lower than those 3. For Disney, that would be a disaster, quite frankly, because it would trigger clauses in those contracts with Charter, Comcast, DirecTV that would force them to also give those 3 companies the lower rates. So we're talking about 68% of Disney's market in their distribution business that would then be paying less than what is currently written in their contracts. So big deal for Disney. Yesterday, well, actually this morning, I did a little reporting for us here at Awful Announcing saying that YouTube TV, and this is what a spokesperson told me, does not actually want to pay lower rates yet. They have agreed to equal rates to those big 3 distributors. What they want codified in their contract is that once YouTube TV surpasses those distributors by subscriber numbers, which is projected to happen next year, maybe 2027, that then YouTube TV would be able to negotiate lower rates. This seems to be the impasse here, Brendan. Honestly, the conversations I've had with spokespeople at YouTube and at Disney, it doesn't seem positive in terms of reaching a resolution here soon, but it never seems positive until there is actually an agreement on the table that is signed. So like, I don't think that really would indicate anything in terms of timeline here, but we're getting some more details trickling in. And I don't know, to me, it's interesting how the PR battle is going between YouTube and Disney. We've seen a lot of polling at this point that most of the public's blaming Disney. Where are you kind of coming down on the blame game at this point?
Well, I feel vindicated from our original conversation about this when I made the case for why cable companies are actually seen as the good guys here. And then we did a poll at Awful Announcing where that seemed to be backed up. And I think that the conversation has kind of leaned that direction. As far as, blaming, I don't know. I mean, what I think that this is the kind of second and third and fourth waves of this whole thing have taught me that I would take back from our first conversation is to say that, I kind of referred to YouTube as like this cable MPVD service as like a drop in the bucket. They don't really care, this and that. That clearly is not true. I think I understated how clearly important this business is to them because they're willing to go to bat and they kind of are acting like the power players that they are. And I don't think that that's just to like flex. That you don't hold out this long if it's just that. I think that they clearly see a symbiotism between their aspirations for what YouTube.com can be and this. And, to whatever extent there's still going to be cable subscribers, whatever that floor is that we've all been wondering and talking about and imagining for years and years now, they want to have as big of a piece of that pie as they possibly can. And that can still be pretty lucrative for them. Right. And so I think that that's kind of the long game of what we're seeing here from YouTube's side. I don't necessarily have like a take on the ESPN versus ABC side of it, except to say that clearly ESPN and Disney have strategically placed more and more content on ABC over the years. And so it's not a surprise to me at all that eventually that those chickens would come home to roost for them and they would have to answer for that with the business deals that they do. You can't just stack stuff and not expect anyone to notice,
Right. Yeah. This was another thing that a YouTube TV spokesperson told me yesterday. They said, no. The issue is not the price of ESPN. We're happy to pay a high price for ESPN because we acknowledge the value that channel has. The sticking point is the price that Disney is requesting for ABC. And my read on that situation is that Disney, because they are placing more live sports programming on ABC, is asking for a higher rate for that channel. And distributors, before YouTube TV came around, were upset about this because they said, well, you can get ABC for free. You're undercutting the value of our bundle by putting this premium content on ABC instead of ESPN. Like, why would anyone continue to pay for the bundle when they can get this content for free? And they had a point. And like you said, that's now coming home to roost. I think most distributors would say Disney trying to negotiate higher rates for ABC because they're putting more sports on ABC is kind of laughable, because if you have access to ESPN,
choice.
Right. Yeah. Like, all these sports are also happening on ESPN or, in the ESPN app.
Or to your point, they're free if you have an antenna and you want to get them. And, it's like ESPN and Disney did that for their own sake, business wise, to, have it be available to a bigger audience, advertising, whatever that might be. It's like, you don't get to, milk it twice. I can see YouTube's or any other cable company's perspective on that. And so it's just, I keep coming back to, like, I understand where both sides are coming from and why it matters so much. And I guess ABC is going to be the thing that snaps this one way or another, if that is to be believed. But
to me, it's kind of spin, right? Because the rate that you're paying for ABC is inherently tied to the rate you're paying for ESPN, right? Sure. It's all dependent on what sports are exclusively available on which channel. So I think to say they have no problem with what they're paying for ESPN is silly because, well, if you're going to pay a lower price for ESPN, so you could pay a little bit of a higher price for ABC, like it evens out. So I think that is kind of more spin on the PR department's part. But I agree. Like, it's hard to assign blame here because for both companies, it's like that, they're really driving a hard bargain. Disney rightfully doesn't want to have to cut rates for almost 70% of their distribution business. YouTube TV also rightfully thinks, it's going to be the biggest player in pay TV distribution in a year or two. They should be treated as such. And not only that, like, the power of Google in YouTube TV is much bigger than the power that, a direct TV or a Charter would have, right? Like, we're talking about one of the largest corporations in the world here in Google and Alphabet with almost a $2 or $3 trillion market cap. YouTube TV is going to become a platform that is like much more well integrated into the just overall YouTube ecosystem. And I think that's why, to your point, like, this is a bigger picture play for YouTube and Google. They're looking to capture, the live audience because they acknowledge that live programming is important to the mix when you're talking about how people watch television these days. So
they want to own video. They see an opening
Right.
for themselves to be the destination for internet video. And you can't ignore, I mean, there's stuff that's live on YouTube, but this is different. And you kind of have to, well, you don't have to. Netflix doesn't try to do this, whatever. But given that they already have invested so much, clearly they want to keep pushing for this to be an area of strength for them versus some of their competitors.
Yeah. I will say one thing, kind of tangential to this. As a YouTube TV subscriber who has not had ESPN for almost 2 weeks now, outside of the live games, I haven't missed it at all. I almost feel like it's like a weight, like a burden lifted off my shoulders. And maybe that's because I work at Awful Announcing and just kind of have ESPN as background noise a lot of the time. But
how are you liking the herd?
Yeah, right. I've always been a herd guy, so okay. That's nothing new for me. But yeah, I don't know. Like, outside of missing Monday Night Football, a couple of basketball, like college basketball games that I wanted to watch. Honestly, I don't feel like I've missed much, but I know I can't go on like this long term.
No, and it's gonna get old after a while. I'm sure they are bleeding subscribers to some degree. YouTube is. I'm sure we've obviously seen ESPN take a hit brand wise and perception wise, and this is hurting both sides the longer that it goes, whether they want to acknowledge that part or not. So, it's going to end, but it's a much bigger fight than anyone thought. And I think it's bringing some bigger trends to the surface for sure.
Yeah. All right, Brendan, I think that's a good place to wrap up here. Tomorrow, it seems like we will have an NFL announcer draft where we'll get the three guys, me, you, and our guy Ben Axelrod on. We did this last year. I think it was really fun. We're going to do it again. 2025 Awful Announcing NFL announcer draft live tomorrow afternoon. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for tuning in. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate the podcast, leave a review. It's all very much appreciated. And we will see you guys tomorrow.